call this meeting of the Blount County Beer Board into action here, I hope, and we will, Mr. Clerk, would you please roll call for us? Do the roll call first. Okay. Just so you got to have a quorum.
Okay. Birchfield. Here. Burkholder. Here. Carver. Here. Farmer. Here. French. Gamble. Here. Helton. Here. Kirby. Here. Lambert. I think so. Lael.
Here.
Okay, you have 9 present and 1 absent. You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And so since we have a quorum, we will proceed. John, can you do the announcement for us back there?
Before we get started, let me read the emergency evacuation procedures. In the event of an emergency evacuation, an alarm will sound. Everyone should exit the building by way of the nearest stairwell in a safe and effective manner. If the nearest stairwell is blocked by smoke, use the other stairwell. Do not use the elevator. Once you have reached the main floor, follow the exit signs to exit the building and quickly proceed away from the building. Please be mindful of others evacuating and of emergency vehicles.
Thank you. First of all, I will entertain a motion for the setting of the agenda. Ms. Lambert made the motion and Ms. Birchfield second. All those in favor of setting our agenda, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Any in the negative? None. Hearing none. We will move on. I will entertain a motion for the approval of minutes of the meeting for December 10th, 2013. Mr. Helton made the motion and Mr. Carver with the second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none, we will continue onward. First of all, I will ask if there is public input on items on this agenda. Seeing none, we will move ahead. First of all, we will address the unfinished business, that is discussion possible action regarding policy concerning violations of regulations regarding selling to underage consumers, and discussion and possible action regarding temporary beer permits. In conversation with Mr. Garrett, before we go into that scenario, I would like to amend somewhat the direction of this agenda, if it's possible. And as we did some review and questions on this massive amount of information you all have obtained there, I would like to ask for Mr. Garrett to take and give his results from the research he has done that will impact both the unfinished business and the new business that we have concerning our beer policy here in the county, if that is okay with this committee. Yes, let's make it formal. Ms. Lambert moved, and Ms. Birchfield second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Aye, okay. The motion was to dispense with these 2 items and let Mr. Garrett bring about the results of his research. Mr. Garrett, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I was not here at the last meeting, but I know we had started on the issues of looking at implementing a policy to address violations when a permit holder sells or is convicted of selling to a minor. And then also there were some questions about did the board possibly want to change the process for a temporary permit as opposed to a regular permit. Also, I'd been asked by one of the members of the board to research another question dealing with the ordinance and our beer ordinance and its applicability to some facts that he brought to my attention. And in doing that research, I realized that our beer ordinance is was the majority of it, except for a couple of amendments that were required by state law. It was implemented in 1980, and it's so, 30 plus years old or 40 years old. My math's not good, but it's very old, and a good portion of our beer ordinance is outdated. And when I was looking and doing the research, there are some other areas of our beer ordinance that does not comply with the current status of state law. The issue of how we handle the violations, if this board wants to establish a policy of how we deal with violations, I think it would involve amending the beer ordinance itself. And I thought while doing that, it probably would be a good idea to look at other parts of the ordinance that may need to be updated to comply with state law. As I said in the memo that I sent you folks last month, you certainly have a right and probably an obligation to deal with violations that you become aware of. The problem that we have now is we just don't really have a mechanism for this board to always be in the know when a permit holder or one of their employees is convicted for selling to minors. And if we do look at, if this board looks at recommending to the commission, because an amendment of the beer ordinance would have to come from the full commission, one way to help with the policy of the underage drinking violations is if we put, one of the hard parts is going to be monitoring. If we amended our ordinance to make it a requirement for any permit holder to make this board aware if there is a violation at their premises by either them, the permit holder, or one of their employees, require that in our rules and in the beer ordinance to make them make the board aware. And that's one way to help you monitor it and become aware of it. And then the other is, I think we could probably ask the sheriff's department to make this board through the secretary aware of any charges that are brought, so we can monitor, the board can monitor the cases. And then you certainly could have a policy, because there's some parts of the state law that has been changed, and I noticed in tonight's packet we had a letter in the packet from the Alcohol Beverage Commission where they had cited the Airport Hilton for violation of the sale of liquor without IDing a customer. And a new law came onto the books. I wasn't aware why that letter was sent. I got to look, and I looked at the statute, and it wasn't in the written copy, so I had to go on the computer. But last April, they amended the statute that now requires the ABC, if they become aware of a violation of the law at one of the locations for selling liquor, they are supposed to make this board aware by a certified letter, and then this board, well, I say this board, or as that case may be, we're not the only beer board in town. That was in the city of Alcoa. I think they sent the notice to us. It should have been sent to Alcoa, but if it had happened in the county, it would be sent to us, and that statute says that we may also suspend the beer permit of this premises holder. But the part of the new law that bothered me is that it says that if this board suspends or revokes the beer permit of a license holder, if they also sell liquor by the drink at that location, then we have to give notice to the ABC director of that violation, and they can suspend their liquor license. So the laws are kind of changing towards more enforcement of these permits, or beer, whether it be beer or liquor, by suspension. So it probably would not be a bad idea for this board to recommend to the commission that we have a policy that when somebody is convicted, especially of the sale of a minor, that the permit holder would have to come before this board for some further action. Oftentimes when they go to court, they simply pay a fine and cost and have no ramifications about their permit. If they that may not be enough, course, that's up to you guys, because, you know, the whole idea is to educate and to encourage these permit holders, you know, not to violate the law. So what I had told Chairman Lael is that, you know, if you decide you want to implement a policy, I think it would probably be the hard part is to monitor this, and I think one way to do it, it would be to amend our ordinance and make the permit holder, you know, self-report. If they fail to do that, you could certainly take that into consideration when they did come before you. But the final thing is and I've gone about halfway through the beer ordinance. I haven't gotten all the way through it, but I've been through it enough to know that much of it is outdated, and it needs to be changed. Back when that ordinance went on the books, you could buy beer if you were over 18. And now the law is that, you know, that you can't buy or drink beer until you're 21, and the state law defines a minor to meet that criteria. You can, however, work in a location to sell beer if you're over 18 but under 21, and our ordinance kind of conflicts with that in some areas. Actually, you know, this ordinance is so outdated, this body, by our beer ordinance, is supposed to be appointed by the county executive. That's what our beer ordinance says. This board is to be appointed by the county executive. You know, that's obviously not the way it works. So that needs to be changed. You know, your ordinance says y'all will meet the first Thursday of every month. I don't know, you don't meet the first Thursday of every month. That probably needs to be updated. And I don't know if this one's kosher or not, but you can't get a beer permit according to our ordinance if you're not a citizen of the United States. Now, I don't know if that's valid or invalid. I looked at it and thought it was a novel question, but we've got a 30-year-old ordinance, and you know, it probably needs to be updated. So what I've recommended to the chairman is that I would finish analyzing that and then put in writing for you all the areas that I think conflict with current state law, and let you look at those and then point out any other areas that may need to be amended, but ultimately let you all make the decision. And if you do, then I will be glad to redraft the ordinance as you decide it needs to be based on what I point out to you. And then I think if this board then tells me we do want to change this, we don't want to change that, I will finalize that, and then you could possibly recommend that to the full commission and send it for the commission for them to update this ordinance, because we're dealing with a pretty outdated document. It wouldn't hurt to clean it up before somebody decides to challenge some action of this board or something that's done based on an antiquated ordinance. Any questions?
Okay, and is there a second?
Second.
Do I hear a second? Second, Ms. Lambert. Any discussion on this,
I
Mr.
like-
Burkhalter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Garrett, when you go through and do your analysis, can you also provide us with a comparison as to how our proposed beer ordinance would be in line with the other municipalities inside of the county and what their distinctions would be, so that way we can find out how different we are between Alcoa, Townsend, Maryville? I think those are the only three that have beer permits, correct? Beer boards?
Well, I know Maryville and Alcoa. I assume that some of the smaller municipalities do. I'm not sure, but
I don't know if Louisville has one or not.
Has Louisville got one?
Yes, Louisville has a beer permit board.
Yes,
Thank you.
I know
Our
that
Louisville representative down there is asleep. He's still asleep.
I can certainly do that. Yeah, I can.
But Craig, I'm just curious as to what our differences are, because if somebody's trying to do business in the county and they start saying, well, the cities are a little bit more lenient, I'd like to know kind of where we might
Be glad to. That'll
be in
be-
harmony.
Be very easy to do, and I'm not proposing any changes. But for example, the 2,000-foot rule, that is That is the maximum, I mean, the distance. You can make that distance shorter. You can't make it any greater, but you can make it shorter. The state law says, you can prohibit up to 2,000 feet. I don't know what the cities do. I think they have a lesser.
Zero lot line.
Okay, I don't know, but there's obviously going to be some differences, and I'll be glad to include that in there
Thank you.
for you guys.
Okay, would there be any more questions? Any more questions from the committee? This is, as Mr. Garrett said, this is quite an undertaking, and the basis being very obviously that we are trying to operate in 2014 with something that was created 30-some years ago, and a lot of things have changed, and so in trying to piecemeal, I went along with Mr. Garrett's suggestion because to try to piecemeal something that didn't quite fit into the previous set of regulations would really put us in a quandary and probably at odds with each other and probably create opportunities for lawsuits or whatever. So the best way is to revamp those items that need to be, and remember the overriding factor: we cannot supplant state law or regulations on this, and that will apply to several of the items that we'll be looking at. So after hearing, we are now ready for the vote. If there is no more questions or discussion, okay, would all those in favor please signify by saying aye? Those opposed? I hear none, so we will declare that motion to have passed. Mr. Garrett, you have been charged with the responsibility of reviewing and providing a recommendation to us.
Glad to. It's an
All
important
right.
subject.
Yes, I think so. The new business also I felt like was addressed during Mr. Garrett's presentation and our discussion here, so we can move on to that. The next meeting is a interesting kind of a question here. I don't know that. Do you have any idea how long this will take you, Mr. Garrett? Because there's no sense meeting unless you have information for us.
I mean,
Do you need a month?
yeah, a month.
A month, okay. So our next agenda meeting will be March the 11th, and we will meet at 6 o'clock. Any information that you might come up with beforehand, if you would get a draft to Rhonda, she'll see that we get it, and we'll have some prior information to review before we come in here. Okay. Is there public input on items that are not covered on the agenda? Seeing no hands, I will stand for a motion for adjournment. Thank you very much. We are adjourned. Thank you for coming tonight.